Good evening, and thank you for joining the Westerly Library in Wilcox Park for tonight's author talk. This program is being presented using the webinar version of Zoom, and attendees are joining in listening mode only. Please send any questions through the Q&A or chat feature at the bottom of your screen, and we will do our best to answer them within the time we have allotted. Please note that this program is being recorded and will be posted on our YouTube channel at a later date. Should you get disconnected, simply use the link that was emailed to you earlier to get back into the program. I will now turn it over to our moderator for tonight, a member of the Board of the Friends of Westerly Library in Wilcox Park, Mary Weiss.
Thank you very much, Amanda. We appreciate the work that you've done to bring this wonderful evening to our audience with Jillian Cantor. It is true, I am a member of the Board of the Friends of the Westerly Library in Wilcox Park, and the Friends are collaborating with the library in bringing this virtual author talk via Zoom this evening. We have an extra guest this evening.
Yeah, I'm gonna lock her out. I'm gonna turn off my video for a second.
There was a dog in this story, by the way, so we can maybe talk about that a little bit. Do you remember, of course you remember, you wrote it, but there is a dog in this version of The Great Gatsby.
There is, and that was kind of like a key plot issue from the original, which we can talk about. But yeah, my dog and my cat decided to chase each other the second we went live, of course.
Well, maybe we'll get back to Duke, who is the dog
yeah.
of The Great Gatsby. But for now, I think we'll start off with a little bit more macro approach. First of all, I want to say it's particularly opportune that we are discussing your recently released book, Beautiful Little Fools, because it reimagines, The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald from a female perspective. But we are 3 days before National Librarian Day. And a copy of Fitzgerald's classic is no doubt in every public and school library in the United States and many throughout the entire world. Since its publication in 1925, countless librarians have most likely answered many questions about it. So Amanda, be prepared if there are some follow-up questions as a librarian at the Westerly Library. Many of our audience tonight, I suspect, have read The Great Gatsby at one point or another. For myself, it was in high school. For others, it could have been in college or just as general reading. So to put us all on the same page, since they may have read this a while back, could you just give us a brief overview or synopsis of your book and how, in major points, because there's a lot of detail in your book, it differs from Gatsby, the Fitzgerald version of Gatsby?
Sure. So thank you for having me. And I apologize for my dog and my cat. Now my cat is like crying behind me. I don't know if you can hear it. They always want to be on the Zoom.
We welcome all guests.
Yeah, my novel is Beautiful Little Fools. And it's a reimagining of the world of The Great Gatsby, but it's told from the female points of view. So The Great Gatsby is narrated by Nick, who's Daisy Buchanan's cousin. He's sort of an outsider to this world on Long Island. But my novel is narrated by Daisy Buchanan and her friend Jordan Baker, and then Myrtle Wilson's sister Catherine, and a little bit from Myrtle herself. And the original takes place just over one summer in Long Island in 1922. Mine spans 1917 to 1923. So it's like before, during, and after the original novel. And, you know, I read The Great Gatsby in high school for the first time, and then read it again in college, and then came back to it as an adult. And it just always really loved The Great Gatsby. You know, I loved the story. I loved the writing. I thought it was really beautiful. But I was always interested in the women. So much in the original Great Gatsby revolves around the women. The plot completely revolves around the women, the affairs and the murders and all the recklessness and the parties. But the women barely speak in the original, and we definitely never know how they're feeling. So I always wanted to, you know more about what was going on in their interior world. And, you know, I thought about the fact that Nick's point of view and sort of like version of the events of that summer might be very different than, you know, Daisy and Jordan's point of view of the same events. So that's what Beautiful Little Fools explores. And also Beautiful Little Fools is a murder mystery. So like The Great Gatsby, you know, ends with Gatsby's death. And Beautiful Little Fools sort of asks if maybe we didn't know what happened, maybe one of the women was responsible. And so it's also written like a murder mystery. There's a detective character who's investigating his death.
Well, it is interesting because the Gatsby original version by Fitzgerald sort of leaves us hanging. We've got this dead body, and then we walk a little bit, we've got another dead body.
Yeah.
So the assumption is, okay, murder, suicide, end of
Right.
story.
They don't really investigate it though. They're just kind of.
And
Yeah.
you're not willing to accept that. Well, when I first approached her book, I thought of it as historical fiction. But then I said to myself, well, does that really work? Because it's a book about a book. And it's not a book about a person in the past or a past event. So would you just clarify if whether it's both historical fiction or murder mystery, or do we choose one or the other?
It's both. I would say it's both. It is historical fiction because it does take place in this like historical, moment in time.
Mhm.
Catherine, for instance, is a suffragette and she's part of the suffrage movement. Daisy and Jordan are definitely sort of like dealing with what's happening in the world around them in this very specific time and place. So I think that makes it a historical novel, but it is a murder mystery too. I mean, I keep saying it's part historical novel, part mystery, and part retelling of a classic. So it's all three.
Well, that's a trifecta. That's very good. So we've covered the typical question that most people ask is, well, why did you write this book? And I think we figured that out. But you draw upon the original extensively in terms of plot lines, quotes, and I was a lawyer before I retired, and I didn't do intellectual property, so I'm not really up on copyrights and things of that sort. But this seems like you really pulled out a lot. Is that permissible to do that?
So the original Great Gatsby actually entered the public domain in January of 2021, I believe. So yeah, once it's in the public domain, it's no longer under copyright. So it is. I would not have been able to have used anything from the original without permission from the estate if it had still been copyrighted, but it's not still copyrighted. So I think that it is fair game at this point.
I think it is. And I think as we discussed a little bit earlier, there's kind of a resurgence of interest now in the Great Gatsby. It's interesting to me, you held up the book just a few moments ago, and I have a copy before me also of the Great Gatsby. I'm sure it's just one of many that have come out. And you use a device that's in both books. And I wanted to first read what's called the epigraph from the Gatsby version. And then I'm going to read the one from your version. And they're different. And I was hoping that you could help us a little bit, guide ourselves through them. And I think it is significant, but you can tell me if you agree. This is from the original Great Gatsby, written by, well, there's an interesting name at the bottom of it. So I hope this will be enjoyed by our audience. He writes, then wear the gold hat, if that will move her. If you can bounce high, bounce for her too. Till she cried, lover, gold-hatted, high-bouncing lover, I must have you. And this is attributed to a Thomas Parker, probably going to mispronounce this, de Villiers. So my question to you, when you then compare that to what's written in your book, is there a significant difference? You write in your epigraph, which is, by the way, for our audience, if you don't know what that is, it's before the story actually begins. And you write, I hope she'll be a fool. That's the best thing a girl can be in this world, a beautiful little fool. So we have two different epigraphs here. And is it significant, at least it seems to me, that they're different?
Yeah, so the epigraph is like the quote that you see in the beginning of the book before the book starts. And mine is a line from the original Great Gatsby that Daisy Buchanan says to her cousin Nick, and she's talking about when her daughter was born, and she says she wanted the baby to be a boy, and she asks them, and then they tell her it's a girl, and she said, well, I hope she'll be a fool. That's the best thing a girl can be in this world, a beautiful little fool, which obviously inspired my title for the novel, which is Beautiful Little Fools. So, that is why I chose that for the epigraph. I don't know why F. Scott Fitzgerald chose the particular quote that he did for the epigraph, but, I think The Great Gatsby is very much about like wealth and the American dream. And, the carelessness of these wealthy people. And I think his quote gets, towards that. Whereas mine is about the women. And I think the fact that the men see them as fools, but beneath the surface, there's so much else going on. And that's what my book's about. And so generally when I'm picking the epigraph, I try to find something that I feel like encapsulates the theme of the book. And so that was actually an easy one for me. Yeah, sometimes I kind of struggle with it, or I'll have like a few different options, or I'll really have to go back at the end. But this one I knew right away. I knew that was going to be it all along.
Well, simplistically speaking, for me, Fitzgerald was focusing on men and treating women in sort of a less than favorable light, whereas your epigraph focuses on women. And
yeah, well, that is also true. And I think that's true of the books as well.
That's true. And then what's just a little reading I did, the signature line in the Fitzgerald one is a character from another book of his, which I thought was sort of interesting. It's a pen name he used, let's see, for himself in a character in This Side of Paradise. But I don't pretend to be a F. Scott Fitzgerald scholar. No way. Doesn't work that way. Now we get to the substance of this epigraph, which you have said, and it's true, it's a quote from the book itself. And it talks about the best thing a girl can be in this world, a beautiful little fool. Now, does Daisy continue to have that view throughout the book, or does she change her view with that?
I am of the opinion that Daisy never really had that view. I mean, she says that to Nick in The Great Gatsby, and Nick takes her at face value. And I do think she said that. And if you kind of like look at the backstory in The Great Gatsby, we know that when Daisy has her daughter, Tom has cheated on her on their honeymoon. And so she's sort of just like, fed up with her position. I think, she married this guy and she realizes sort of how powerless she is in the face of everything. And I think she sort of says it out of frustration. But by the time she says it to Nick in the summer of 1922, I'm not sure she believes it herself. And that was sort of my personal view of it. Nick believes her. Nick thinks that she's speaking, completely, she's being completely honest, but I don't think that she's a fool. I don't think that she thinks that she's a fool either. I kind of felt like it was something she said to not impress him, but, she was sort of like speaking to make a point, but I don't think she actually thinks that in my book the whole time.
No, and I think you make that clear later on, but I think that she's playing up to men, like I think women were thought of in that era in order to get whatever goal they wanted. And that's, I think, the manipulation aspect of what's going on here with Daisy. So I don't regard her as a fool at all. She's not a very likable person, but she's certainly not a fool, because later on in the book, if I may quote you right, I wanted more for her, meaning her daughter, Pammy, than to be a fool. I never wanted men to treat Pammy the way they treated me. I wanted her to be brave and fearless and independent. So I think that sums it up quite well. So I think when she speaks honestly and truthfully, that's what she believes, not this And
I think what she says out loud to Nick isn't necessarily what's going on in her head. And so that was sort of my goal as a writer in Beautiful Little Fools, was figuring out what might have been different in Daisy's interior world, and kind of giving a window into that from my perspective.
Well, I kind of liked her more when I read the explanation later on, but I can't say she's my favorite character. You use the word fool more than once to other characters in your book. So our audience understands there are several women in this book. They have multiple relationships, but one is Jordan, who's a professional golf player, which wasn't just the LPGA. I don't even think it really started at that point. And she's living with her aunt because she's kind of impoverished. And her aunt says to her, when Jordan reveals, oh, the love of my life is going to marry a man, so we know there's a problem there. And the aunt says, a woman who marries for love is a foolish woman. and tells her that just let her go ahead and do that. I assume that there were, just like men had faux marriages, if I can use that expression, with women, that women did the same thing when they married men. So were you able to get a little bit more sense of that from the book, or your?
Well, we know, I mean, the things we know from The Great Gatsby are that Jordan is a golfer. She does play on the women's golf tour, whatever exactly it was at the time. And also that there's been a rumor of a cheating scandal where she was rumored to have moved the ball and she almost got thrown off the tour. So we know all of that from the book. We know that Jordan has an aunt, Miss Sigourney Howard, and they say she's about 100 years old. That's their comment on her in the book. And so I kind of took all that information from the original and sort of figured out my own storyline for Jordan. Jordan is on the golf tour. That's a big part of the plot in Beautiful Little Fools. And I definitely delve into the cheating scandal from her perspective. And it's not what Nick thinks it is at all in the original. I don't want to give a spoiler.
Yes,
but that's definitely a part of her plot. And I felt like the way they described her aunt, one aunt about 100 years old, I pictured her to be this like very old-fashioned woman. And of course I would think she would say to Jordan, like, you should get married, you're of the marrying age, and you should do all these things that women should want to do. But Jordan wants to play golf and Jordan does not want to get married. So I think that's where that conversation came from. But, I did use the word fool a lot. And I think I was sort of playing off the idea that everyone sees these women as fools or foolish. And, there's so much there in my novel that shows you that they're not.
Well, that kind of leads into my next question quite nicely, because there's a very dramatic scene, which is also in Fitzgerald's version at the Plaza Hotel. And in that, Daisy makes a comment that it was men, not women, who are the fools. Mm-hmm. Now, I can't recall, maybe you can help me out here, if she said that out loud, or is that her interior voice speaking that way?
Yeah, no, I don't remember honestly either. I'd have to look at the scene, but I don't think she said that out loud. I think she thinks that to herself.
But then she goes on, and I can't remember the chronology. It could have been before the Plaza Suite, but the idea is still kind of the same, where she sort of gives us insight into her relationship with Tom. And so our audience may not remember that Tom was extremely wealthy. He had his highlight of his life when he was at Yale playing football, and nothing ever got much better from that. But he was a philanderer, and Daisy had to deal with that, reconcile herself to it if she could. And she says at one point to Tom, about him rather, he loved me, he needed me, and that made me marry him a fool, didn't it? That in itself gave me all the power. So what is she talking about, this dynamic between her and Tom?
So that scene you're talking about, they all go to the plaza. It's the hottest day of the year. And they all go there and they're drinking. And this happens in The Great Gatsby. So they're there it's Daisy and Tom and Jordan and Nick and then Jay Gatsby. And it's sort of the scene in the original Gatsby where Tom and Jay confront each other and argue over Daisy. And they start arguing, and Gatsby wants Daisy to say she never loved Tom, and Daisy can't do that. And so that's what happens in the original. In my version of that scene, we're seeing it from Daisy's point of view. And, she does start thinking about her relationship with Tom, sort of based on what's going on around her that we know from the original. And she sort of has this like realization about, love and power. And the two of them in the original novel really kind of are fools. They start going at each other. They're drunk. And it's like from, Nick kind of points that out too, from his point of view. But I thought, Daisy watching all of this and must think like, these men are ridiculous. What am I doing here?
I like particularly that line where you wrote, he, meaning Tom, loved me. He needed me. So did she understand then that this was her control, this was her independence, this was her authority?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the first time, she's she deals with a lot with Tom. Like he cheats on her in her honeymoon, which we know in the, the original Great Gatsby. So they've been married like 2 months or something. And he's already having an affair with the chambermaid at the Santa Barbara Hotel, which she learns when they get in a car accident together. So that was all in the original. And then she talks about in the original how they had to leave Chicago because of Tom's little spree, which you do get to see in my book. And then we know that Tom's having an affair with Myrtle in The Great Gatsby. So I think, Daisy deals with a lot with Tom and his infidelity. And at that scene in the plaza, he sort of fights for her. And I think that's the first time that she realizes that maybe he does actually love her in spite of everything else that's going on, even though it's this like horrible way to love her. There is something there.
Well, I've heard you speak in other interviews, and I think this is interesting for our audience to know that your process for writing this book was very different from the other books you've written. You've written, what, 15 books or something. So maybe you could help us, because it's very complicated when you try this exercise of comparing one book to your, what you write. So maybe you could help us out.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, people always ask writers if you're a plotter or a pantser, meaning like, do you outline if you're a plotter or a pantser? You sort of fly by the seat of your pants and, you just write your first draft as it comes to you. And I'm definitely a pantser. I never outline. I usually I know where a book starts and I know where it ends. And maybe I have an idea of sort of like something in the middle and I just, figure out that line as I go along. But Beautiful Little Fools, I actually outlined completely. I had it chapter by chapter outlined before I started. And it was because I took so many plot points and the timeline from the original Great Gatsby. I mean, even though the Great Gatsby only takes place over these 3 months in the summer, we learned so much information about what the characters were doing between 1917 and that summer in 1922. So I sort of mapped that out based on just like little lines of dialogue or, comments that people make. So I figured out where each one of the characters were for those 5 years and what they were doing and who they were with. And then I sort of put that all together and then it ended up in like a chapter outline. And I wrote from there and I actually kept everything like as you read the book. It was exactly as my outline was, except for the final chapter, which was not in my outline. And it was only after my editor read the first draft that she came back and told me I was missing the last chapter. And I was like, no, this is the last chapter in my outline. I kind of like argued with her a little bit. And then I realized what she was talking about, that the book did need another chapter. So that last chapter was added, after the first draft. And she was right. I think this was a better way to end, but everything else ended up staying. And it was actually a really different experience for me to write a book, but I actually just finished writing my next book and I did not outline it at all. I thought that I was going to like change and then I couldn't do it. I went back to my old ways.
Well, it must have been exhausting because I tried to do it a little bit and I just threw up my hands. It was very, very difficult.
It was really fun. I mean, I love The Great Gatsby. So it was actually really fun to go through it and do this like very detailed annotation of it and figuring out where everyone was in 1917 and what they were doing. And, Jordan mentioned at one point that she saw Daisy in Santa Barbara when they were on their honeymoon. So I knew in that time they were together and I knew where Daisy and Tom went on their honeymoon. And it was very fun and in sort of a nerdy way, for someone who loves The Great Gatsby to do that. I actually had a great time doing it.
Well, I was going to ask you if it's a one-time experience or you think you'll ever go back to doing that again because it was so difficult.
I mean, I think if it were the right book, I would do it again. It'd have to be another book that was no longer under copyright that I loved. And, I don't know if that will ever present itself. It might. I wouldn't say never.
Well, we never do that. Never. There is one other comment that Daisy makes, sort of ending up this theme of being a fool. And she describes Myrtle. Now, Myrtle is the wife of George Wilson, who runs this little garage. And Myrtle's having this affair with Tom, who is Daisy's husband. And she describes Myrtle as a poor, stupid fool of a woman like her. And I was like, well, wait a minute. We've just gone through this great discussion about how Daisy really is more perceptive than we think. And now all of a sudden she's aligning herself with Myrtle, who was physically abused by, I guess, Tom and George, her husband. So what is she saying here? Is that the exterior view of Daisy, or is this really her speaking again about one side of her, or what's going on here?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the original, we feel like there is this like great divide between Myrtle and Daisy, and definitely this class divide. Daisy is this wealthy woman, this, wife of this like mega rich man, whereas Myrtle is like poor, and she sort of sees Tom as her way out of this life, living in the Valley of Ashes, above this garage. But there's a scene in the original, and it's in my book as well, where Tom and Myrtle have a party in the city. Tom has an apartment for Myrtle, and they have a party there, and he gets mad at Myrtle, and he ends up punching her in the face, and he breaks her nose. And it's like, really, you think about the fact that like Daisy and Myrtle were in such different positions at this time, but as women, they were sort of just like reduced to these powerless beings in this time, in this place. And Myrtle really thinks that Tom is going to give her something better. And I think when I read The Great Gatsby, that's the scene where it like hits home for me that he's not. It's just a different, a different version of what she already has, I think. And so I think Daisy saying that was like coming to that realization a little bit herself.
Going back to this use of quotes and plots from The Great Gatsby, you've chosen this beautiful little fool's phrase, and we started out talking about that, which is really an essential element of your story. Are you telling a feminist story here, or are you just relating what you think was going on at that time period, or is it a combination of both?
I think that it is a feminist story. And relating what is going on at the time period. The circumstances that these women are in sort of are a product of the time period. Jordan has to sort of struggle with who she's in love with because of the time that she's living in. And Daisy has to struggle with her choices as a woman because of the time she's living in. And Catherine, who we haven't really talked about too much, but she's Myrtle's younger sister, and she's mentioned in The Great Gatsby twice. So she's a very minor character in The Great Gatsby, but she's one of my main characters. And she arrives in New York in the beginning, and she steps off the train, and she says that she was happy to be in New York because a woman could be someone in New York, not someone's wife, just someone. And I think that's sort of the theme of my novel. How do these women come into their own sort of in spite of the circumstances that are surrounding them and the time that they're living in? And so it's definitely a feminist perspective in that regard, I think.
Well, it is interesting to me. Catherine is Myrtle's sister, and Catherine is a very independent woman, but yet, and she's a suffragette, and she goes to all these meetings and espousing all that, but yet she has a relationship with Gatsby, a sexual relationship.
She does.
And so how does she?
Although she
work
does not
through
want to
that?
marry him. She just wants to, like be
Have a
with
good
him a little
time.
bit. Yeah.
Right. There's another great quote at the ending of The Great Gatsby, where Nick says, "So we beat on, boats against the current, borne back ceaselessly into the past." And another theme of this book, I think, could be how you treat the past. And there's different perspectives on that. And how does Gatsby think of the past?
Well, I mean, in the original Great Gatsby, we learn a little bit about his backstory. He came from very, he did not come from wealth. And then he sort of, had this friend who was wealthy, and he also was in love with Daisy and sort of, aspired to be of means and gets there illegally, which is kind of hinted at. And, he's also very stuck in the past in the original. He's sort of obsessed with Daisy, I would say. And that's really what triggered me to write Beautiful Little Fools, was thinking about the plot of The Great Gatsby from Daisy's point of view. The book starts Daisy has just moved to this new home with her husband. And then this man she broke up with 5 years ago moves right across the sound from her so he can stare at her, basically. And I thought, Nick in the original really romanticizes that. Like, Nick very much sees it as a love story. He thinks that Daisy and Gatsby have this amazing love. But from Daisy's point of view, I thought, this is somewhat creepy. This guy is almost—
Is he a stalker?
He's kind of stalking her. And
Yes.
I feel like some of her reactions in the book might, made me uncomfortable. And I felt like she might have been feeling uncomfortable. And it was interesting to think, like, well, from a man's perspective and Nick's perspective, this is a romantic thing to do. Gatsby's still in love with her. He wants her back. He buys this gorgeous house. He makes all this money. He wants to give her everything. But from a woman's perspective, I don't think that's romantic. And I don't think that would have been romantic in 1922 either.
Well, you got to think of the era. It was the so-called jazz age, which I think Fitzgerald coined that phrase. They had just come out of World War I. They had just come out of a pandemic. So
Yes.
People were in a party mood, and Gatsby, I guess, threw some great parties. But how does Nick react to Gatsby when he thinks he can go back, he being Gatsby, and live in the past by taking Daisy and moving to Louisville or something?
In the original, I think that Nick thinks that they are going to be together. Nick has sort of like a hopeful view, and he sees Gatsby through these like rose-colored glasses. And I think one of the things that I've always found so fascinating about the original is just the really interesting way that Fitzgerald as a writer uses this point of view to tell his story. But I felt like Daisy's point of view would be completely different. And as a writer, I'm always interested in point of view. For Beautiful Little Fools, for all of my books, I always like thinking about how the person who tells the story affects the story, and how, two different characters could see the exact same story, but would tell a different story because of their perspective. And I think that's really what I'm getting at in Beautiful Little Fools. It's like we're seeing the same events, but they don't mean the same thing because Daisy's doing them differently than, Nick did in the original.
But in your version, don't both Nick and Daisy tell Gatsby, you can't go to the past. We can't do that. Life has moved on.
Yeah. And, Daisy does say that to him in the original. But
she does.
Yeah. Okay. That scene when they're at Nick's house, and Nick sort of like tricks Daisy into coming and invites Gatsby there and sets the whole thing up. That was in the original. And Gatsby says to her, let's just erase the last 5 years and go back. And I think her answer in my book is a little different. Like, she doesn't really say anything in the original, but that was from the original book.
Okay, because that also gives me more admiration for Daisy, but she's a hard character to like, I really have to say. Your book is a lot longer than The Great Gatsby. Mm-hmm. It is written from the perspective of 5 narrators, if I can count them, rather than one. So you just were making a tough job for yourself. I mean, this was a lengthy process, a difficult process, but why did you choose to have 5 narrators rather than just 1 or maybe 2?
Initially, I think when I had the idea, I thought that I was just going to do Daisy's point of view. I think my original idea was that I was going to reimagine The Great Gatsby from Daisy's point of view. But I think that Jordan, who's Daisy's closest friend in The Great Gatsby, has always been my favorite. So then I thought, well, I'm going to have Jordan too. I knew I wanted to have Daisy and Jordan. And then I thought I really wanted to have Myrtle because I've always been fascinated with Myrtle. But we know, and I don't think it's a spoiler to say this because it happens in the original book, but Myrtle was killed in the original. And I knew that mine was going to go, past the original. So I thought, well, that would be kind of depressing to have Myrtle be one of the main characters and then kill her halfway through. So I decided to make Catherine the main narrator for that storyline. Although we do see a little bit of Myrtle. There's like 2 chapters for Myrtle. And then the 5th narrator is the detective, Frank Charles. And he was not in The Great Gatsby at all. He's my one character that was just, completely mine. Mm-hmm. And he's the one who finds a diamond hairpin at the scene of Gatsby's murder and starts to suspect, maybe one of these 3 women were involved. And he just has a few interspersing chapters. He kind of moves the plot along as he's questioning them and trying to solve the mystery of what happened to Gatsby. I actually love writing multiple points of view, and a few of my earlier books had that as well. So I don't know that I think it's more work necessarily. It's just,
Seems like it to
it's
me,
a
but
different way to approach it. And I sort of imagined this book as like Big Little Lies meets The Great Gatsby. And I sort of had that feel for it in my head, and just felt like the right way to tell it when I was, first starting to write it.
Well, I know Detective Charles is important, and we won't spoil anything about the book, and the diamond hairpins are important. But is there another aspect to him that sort of softens the story? Because we see these, I don't know, hedonistic people, and his relationship, the detectives with his wife. Was that deliberate on your part to introduce that sort of loving relationship?
Yeah, definitely. Detective Charles is a very nice, kind man who has a really nice relationship with his wife. His whole world revolves around his wife. He would do anything for her. He listens to her. She gives him advice, and he really values it and listens. And so I did kind of feel like we needed something to balance out Tom and Jay, who are kind of awful. They were kind of awful in the original. I don't think that was something that I brought to it. And I felt like we did need a little bit of balance, and Detective Charles brings that in. And he's also just very normal. He's not rich. He has a job. He's a detective. He just lives in an apartment in Brooklyn with his wife. He wants to give his wife nice things. He just has like normal average life at the time. So he does bring balance, I hope.
Yeah. Well, we're not going to do any spoilers, but it is sort of interesting. He has another relationship with another person, which reveals a different aspect of him. So he's not pure as the driven snow either, but he does move that plot line along.
Yeah.
I think we're staying away from the diamond hairpins. Is that safe to say?
I mean, I think you learn in the first chapter that he finds, and it says in the description of the book, he finds a diamond hairpin at the scene of, Gatsby's murder, and suspects that it belongs to the person, the woman who killed him. But that definitely does play a role in the story. Yeah.
All right. Well, I won't go there because it wasn't interesting, because I'll say that there was more than one diamond hairpin. So
yes,
that complicates.
That kept showing up, didn't it?
Yeah, they just kept showing up. Now it is interesting to me, because I'm sort of the way I approach things. I counted your number of chapters, and you had 50, I think. And the person who gets the most is Daisy. She gets 17. So that's not a majority, but she's certainly in the lead there. And I really, as I've said before, wanted to sympathize with this woman. I wanted to like her. But I think you've already indicated that she wasn't your favorite character either. And maybe there were a couple of others. And it seems like you were saying there were Jordan and Catherine. Would that be accurate to say?
Jordan's my favorite in the original novel, I think. And I guess she ended up being my favorite in Beautiful Little Fools too. She was my favorite one to write. But I didn't dislike Daisy. I think that Daisy does some bad things and is in a bad situation.
Which she created by herself. I mean, she married for money, right?
She did. I mean, yeah. I tried to kind of give her a backstory that would give her a little bit more sympathy. I mean, Daisy has a sister in my book that's very influential in her life and her choices, which we don't know. I don't know if she had a sister or not. I don't know if F. Scott Fitzgerald intended her to have a sister. That was never mentioned in The Great Gatsby. So I gave Daisy a sister, Rose, which I felt helped me understand her. But I didn't dislike Daisy. I think that she does come off very unsympathetic in the original, and I more wanted to understand her, I think.
Well, it is interesting to me that F. Scott Fitzgerald, in writing this, does he like any of his characters? I mean, he portrays them in such poor light.
I think he likes Nick.
Yeah, but Nick is sort of a sop. He lives next door to Gatsby.
Yeah.
He's sort of in awe of what's going on with these parties and this rich guy. And he knows Daisy. But and I'm not a Fitzgerald scholar, obviously, but is there something about relationships that F. Scott Fitzgerald had with people, particularly men and women, like he would treat these men? We hate them.
You know, I mean, I think that's like a whole, you know, you could probably do like a whole webinar on that, and Fitzgerald's relationships and, you know, who he based the people on in The Great Gatsby. Yeah, I mean, I think that would be a whole,
That's way beyond us this evening. All right, I get that. It's just such an interesting work that you've done here.
Thank you.
I'm going to stop for a moment now. I have a few more questions, but I want to make sure that our audience gets a chance to ask any questions they have, and that they'll come through the chat room, and then Amanda will relate them to you. Okay. So Amanda, do we have any questions from the audience?
At the moment, I don't see anything. We certainly encourage anyone to send any questions. If you have any comments for Jillian, please send them down at the bottom. Somebody has asked, can you talk more about your writing process and routine? Do you write every day?
Yeah, I do for the most part write every weekday. I don't write on the weekends typically, and I usually write sort of like my kids' school hours, you know, like 8 to 3, 9 to 3, depending on the day of the week. But I don't always write in that time. Like I do something writing related. If I'm drafting a book, then I do write in that time. And when I'm writing a draft of a book, I try to do 5 pages a day. Or if I'm revising, you know, I'll give myself like, okay, I have to get through like these 2 chapters, you know, today and these 2 chapters tomorrow. So I do sort of have like a schedule for myself. Right now, I just finished writing my next book and I'm waiting on edits from my editor. And so I actually haven't written anything this week, but, you know, I've been doing other stuff. I had some books that I needed to read that I was behind on to write blurbs for. You know, I just actually signed 1,500 book plates for a subscription box that Beautiful Little Fools is going to go into. So I usually do like some writing related stuff during the weekdays. But when I'm drafting a book, I try to take the weekends off. And I just feel I know some writers do write every day, but I feel like I need that time to sort of refresh and take a little break and, you know, do other things like watch a TV show or read a book, and then I come back to it Monday morning sort of with fresh eyes. So I do keep pretty regular like working hours.
Any more questions, Amanda?
I don't see any at the moment. I just wanted to throw it in there though, on the topic of signed book plates. If you're interested in purchasing a signed copy of Beautiful Little Fools, you can head into the Westerly location of Savoy.
Well, I have a few follow-up questions, if I may, and this may spark some more discussion from our audience. I remember at school, when we discussed The Great Gatsby, it was all this focus on symbolism, and color was like, we talked about color all the time. And I remember, it was a while ago, 4 colors in particular, and there may be more: white, green, and gray. And I think you've picked up on that in your book, but maybe didn't hit it as heavily as Gatsby did. So white, I always think of as purity, you know, people. White is the driven snow, graceful. And was your idea to use these same colors in the same way that Fitzgerald did?
You know, I think the only thing that really comes across, well, yeah, I do have white in my book. I was going to say the only thing that I think really I kind of brought through was the green light, which is a big, you know, symbolism point in Gatsby that we all talk about in high school. And Daisy has a green light at the end of her dock, and Gatsby's staring off the green light. And Daisy mentions it one time, but it's almost sort of, I sort of stuck it in there. It's just like a nod to the original. It's not really a huge deal in my book, but Daisy and Jordan do wear white a lot. And that was from the original, you know, they're always in white dresses. And I actually read, there was a piece in the New York Times that summer, and it was talking about how white was in fashion suddenly. The summer before, black was all the rage, but that summer white was in fashion. And so that gets into my book a little bit too. But for me, it was more the fact that this is what they were wearing in the original. So these are the same scenes, they're wearing the same thing, and sort of the historical, you know, note of the fact that that color was really popular that summer.
I thought it was kind of interesting that Daisy's daughter, Pammy, wore white the same day as her mother and Jordan did. And I thought, well, maybe you're trying to say that,
Yeah.
these
I believe
ladies
that was
all
in the
do the
original
same.
too. I think
Oh,
they
was
all,
it?
yeah, I
Okay.
think that they
Okay.
described it in that original scene.
And what I had forgotten was that, and I hope I got this right, that Gatsby's eyes were green. And I'm wondering.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot, there was a lot of color and symbolism in the original book. And I think some of that makes it into mine just because I'm using the same characters, but it wasn't like a heavy focus for me as I was writing.
Oh, okay, because I do remember in Fitzgerald's book talking about the ash heaps, I think that was, which was between New York City and East and West Egg, and it being gray.
And one actually, here's an interesting fact. The original title of The Great Gatsby was, I think it was Among the Ash Heaps and Millionaires. And, or maybe it was Between the Ash Heaps and Millionaires. It was something like that. But I have Detective Charles actually say that in a line in my book. He says something like, whatever the original title was, he mentions it and he says it. And that was just sort of like a little nod to that fact, which, probably no one will know but me, but.
I'm sorry, I think I missed it too. But to me, it just meant that, Myrtle was living this horrific life.
Oh, yeah, she was. But I think that was the title that he wanted for the book. And, it got changed before it was published.
Now, I think I mentioned to you earlier, I'm originally from the Midwest and lived there a long time. And I'm thinking that most, if not all, our main characters are from the Midwest. And F. Scott Fitzgerald was from Minnesota. So is there any significance to this and this contrast between these Midwesterners living on the East Coast and how they were behaving or acting? Was there some dynamic going on there that they were wrestling with?
Yeah, I mean, I think the original novel is very much about, what the American dream is and who can have the American dream. And I think there's sort of this like a wholesome quality to Nick, who's from the Midwest and like comes to New York with all these like hopes and, aspirations, and then sort of witnesses these like awful, wealthy, careless people, as he calls them. And, in his summer there.
Although he had gone to school at Yale.
Yeah, that is true. But I think Gatsby being murdered and Myrtle being murdered probably affects him.
Now, you mentioned earlier on that your editor asked you to write a concluding chapter. And I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it's only 4 pages long. So was your heart really in it to write those 4 pages?
Oh, no, definitely. I mean, I think, and I don't want to give a spoiler, but, originally I'll just say originally the final chapter was Detective Frank Charles's chapter, and he's the second to last chapter now. And, really what my editor said to me was, this story is about the women. You can't end it with the only male voice. And when she said that, I was like, okay, yeah, that's a really good point. Maybe he should not have the last word. And now the last chapter is from Daisy's point of view. And it definitely, I think, was the right thing to do. I don't have any doubt about it now. At the time, I couldn't see it because I had it all outlined this certain way. And in my head, it ended this way. But when she said, well, you can't end this novel about women with the one male point of view character. And it was like, yeah, that's a really good point. So it is a short chapter, but I think that it finalizes things for Daisy in a way that weren't finalized before and needed to be done.
Yeah, there's closure, and I'm dying to tell the audience what goes on, but maybe
no, you got to read it.
Haven't read it. I'm not going to say anything. Amanda, I think I see another question in the chat room.
Amos writes that they're listening to the audio version and they were wondering how the voice actors were chosen. Yeah,
that's a good question. So actually, this varies, from book to book and just sort of depending on who's doing the audio. But in this case, my publisher did the audio in-house. So they let me choose the voice actors. They gave me options for each character. I think they sent me like 4 or 5 options for each character, but then they said I could like move them around. So I picked from the options that they sent and I got to choose them. But I actually haven't heard the audio yet, but I'm really excited about the cast. They were all really great.
So what goes into your thinking about how, because I don't typically listen to audiobooks, and maybe this will inspire me to do that. What is there about picking a voice?
It's actually really hard to do. And they send you clips, so they would be like, okay, well, here's, option 1, this actress, and here's 3 clips that she did. But then also you can kind of go on Audible and search them and, listen to clips from all of their books, which I did. And honestly, they probably all would have been great. So I did agonize over it a little bit, but I don't know, how I picked. It was just listening and thinking, okay, I could hear, Jordan's voice and this actress's voice, or I could hear Daisy's voice. And well, actually the woman that did Daisy was the audio narrator for my last novel. And I thought she did a really amazing job. So I actually asked about her. She wasn't on the original. And I asked if we could get her and they said yes. So that's how I chose Daisy.
Well, I get the sense that it took you a period of time to write this book. You're doing all this outlining and doing consistency. And so you really must get to know these people. I mean, they're like, okay, Daisy, let's talk now. So you must have some sense of what Daisy sounds like. I don't have any sense for that, other than maybe a whiner, but that's my own personal prejudice.
Yeah, no, I do, but I mean, the audio narrator choices that they send are all professional, voice actors, and they all are great. Like, that's the hardest part when you listen to the clips and it's like, okay, where do I go from here? And actually the woman who narrates Daisy narrated my last book, which is about Marie Curie, but it was like in 2 different perspectives. And she did a great job with the accents and everything. And I did actually hear a clip of her doing Daisy, and she sounds totally different as Daisy. So it's just a testament to her acting, I think.
That's incredible. Well, I wish they would give, I suppose they wouldn't be Oscar awards, but some sort of awards. Do they give awards for these people?
I think there is the Audies, I think, are audiobook awards. I think so.
Well, that's great. Well, I don't see, at least on my screen, Amanda, that we have any more questions. Is that correct?
Yes, there are no more questions at this time, and we are nearing the 5-minute mark.
Okay, well, we have a hard stop tonight. I'm sorry, Jillian, about that, but we really are very grateful that you came and spent your time with us this evening, although you're maybe a few time zones going west. You did a masterful job in reimagining The Great Gatsby, and it gave me a whole new perspective on the book. So I really appreciate that, and thank you very much. And I hope we can hear about your next book, and perhaps you'll be able to rejoin us at the Westerly Library.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This was great.
Thank you so much, Jillian, and we appreciate you taking the time. It was very enjoyable.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much, everyone.
All right, bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.